Hi, everybody. I'm Danny. I'm here at the Raven Bookstore at our brand new location at 809 Massachusetts Street. And I'm thrilled and honored to be with you here today for the Kansas Day of Advocacy. Of course, I wish I could be there in person, but so it goes. I'm here with you via video. I am a talking head inside of a square on a computer screen. Once again, hopefully someday soon, we can all share a space of joy and inspiration together. So today, I just want to run through a little bit of the Raven Bookstore's history of advocacy and share just two stories of local advocacy, of Kansas advocacy that inspires me. A lot of this is centered on small business because that's the world I run in as a business owner. Many of my friends and fellow advocates are small business owners. So that's naturally the frame and through which I view a lot of it. But I think a lot of the lessons and takeaways from these stories would be interesting and relevant to advocates of all types. But I'm calling this Kansas Small Business and Advocacy. So again, I'm going to start with my journey of advocacy through the Raven, talk a little bit about who we are and how we got here, and then end by talking about two stories from the last year or two that have really inspired me a lot as an advocate and a small business owner. The Raven Bookstore was founded at 6 East 7th Street and 8 East 7th Street in September of 1987. It was a time when there were 7 or 8 bookstores in Lawrence, many of which were downtown. It's a much easier time to run a bookstore because small independent bookstores were the main place that most people, in fact, bought their books from. Pat Cady and Mary Lou Wright were the original owners of the Raven. This is a picture of them appearing in the Lawrence Journal World the day before they opened. And one thing I've learned from Pat and Mary Lou, aside from everything about running a bookstore, is the role of being an advocate as a community member and as a business owner. And Pat and Mary Lou did many things well. One of which was they were very good at telling their story and explaining the importance of the independent bookstore and of small businesses and of a vibrant downtown to anybody. I mean, here they are in the newspaper talking about it. They were great at sharing their story and being an advocate for the Raven and for small businesses and for bookstores around the world. And that started from day one. They weren't trying to beat people with lower prices or a bigger selection. I don't even think they were trying to beat people. That's one thing that I love about the idea of being a small business in downtown Lawrence is that we're all on each other's team. We're all rooting for each other. They were just trying to provide a service to the literary and mystery communities of Lawrence, Kansas. And so that advocacy became important in an exponential way in 1997 when the Borders Books and Music Superstore opened in downtown Lawrence. And some of you might be too young to even remember Borders, but it was a mega chain. These were huge stores. A bookstore the size of Dillon's. It was equivalent to Barnes and Noble. I think for a lot of us who grew up at the time, Borders was the cooler of the two national bookstore chains. But it was bad news for the Raven because Borders has a gigantic inventory. They often sold at a steep discount. And when a place like Borders moves into a downtown, it's bad news for the small businesses of that downtown. And many bookstores downtown did end up closing in 1996 and 1997 in anticipation of this Borders opening. There was a lot of community grassroots support to prevent this Borders from opening downtown. Lawrence has long been a strong fighter for the presence of small businesses in its downtown. And it's been really important for folks to keep downtown full of small businesses and thriving. So there was a lot of opposition, including from Pat and Mary Lou of the Raven to this Borders even happening. But after a prolonged legal and fight of public opinion, it did end up opening, but that didn't stop Pat and Mary Lou from telling their story and advocating. And part of the Raven's business model became explaining why a place like the Raven was important in comparison to a place like Borders. And that really inspired me quite a bit. Of course, Borders didn't survive the whole chain shutdown in 2011, and the Raven is still here. but I think this small versus big, using advocacy and storytelling to run your business is something I've taken from Pat and Mary Lou. And another thing I've taken over from Pat and Mary Lou is the Raven itself. This is me and Heidi Rock, who's the next owner of the Raven. She bought it from Pat and Mary Lou in 2008. I bought it from Heidi in 2017, and that the advocacy and small business storytelling and the small versus big kind of feeling of the Raven carried on into my tenure. Of course, Borders is gone now, but the biggest challenge we're facing and the biggest threat to small businesses of any kind today is Amazon, and that's become part of our storytelling and advocacy at the Raven. That really took off here in April of 2019. We had a Twitter thread go crazy. You can see the numbers here. This really thrust us into the national conversation about bookstores and Amazon and small businesses in general. And I found myself, and we all found ourselves at the Raven in a spot where a lot of people were listening to us and looking to us for advocacy and storytelling about small businesses and Amazon. And I just thought about what Pat and Mary Lou did so well, and they criticized Borders. They made people aware of its unfair and dangerous business practices, but they also really championed the idea of the small bookstore and advocated in a positive way for bookstores and small businesses. So the Twitter thread got attention. I found myself, just like Pat, being interviewed for a newspaper. This was a Chicago Tribune column written about the tweets. And then eventually I wrote a letter, an open letter to Jeff Bezos, kind of clarifying my argument. I used to teach English, including at the college level. And, you know, it's always about the thesis statement and clarifying your argument. So I figured if I was really going to become an advocate for this, I needed an argument and a thesis statement. So I laid it out in this kind of manifesto in the form of a letter to Jeff Bezos. A friend who runs another bookstore in Cleveland sent me a message that was like, you should make that letter into a zine or a broadside so I can share it with my customers. And I thought that was a great idea. So I got to work hand making a little zine called How to Resist Amazon and Why. And one of the reasons I love the idea of a zine is it would help booksellers and customers have this discussion with each other. So this is no longer just a discussion that I would have with reporters or I would have with other booksellers. This is all of a sudden something that a discussion that would become the center of life at a bookstore. It would happen at the cash register, at the point where the conversation happens in the bookstore. They'd be talking about Amazon and they'd have a resource to help them do advocacy all across the country. So this is a little thing that started in Kansas. I made these zines. The first couple thousand of these zines I made at my dining room table in North Lawrence in Kansas, in the middle of the country. And then all of a sudden, it becomes something that people are buying and talking about across the country and around the world. Yeah, it's amazing. It's still amazing to me how much this zine has gotten out there, how much it's resonated, how much this little zine from Kansas has become a worldwide thing. And I'm glad. And I'm proud to be part of this broader conversation about the importance of small businesses and the dangers of big tech and corporate monopolies. So eventually, the zine became a book. After a couple tedious weeks of spending all of my evenings stapling hundreds of zines by hand, Microcosm Publishing out of Portland offered to put out a version of the zine, and they sold enough of that they were interested in me turning it into a book. So I did. It also became an audiobook and continued its crazy spread from Kansas to the world. So much so, the New Yorker wrote about us. And then this screenshot is from me on Australian TV. Hey, I'm wearing the same shirt. Look at that. But yeah, I mean, this was just one bookstore in Kansas talking about the importance of the bookstore to the community and the dangers presented by the uncontrolled spread of Amazon. But of course, a story that started in Kansas resonated across the country and around the world. And so no matter how small it feels or how, you know, people talk about flyover country all the time and how there's nothing in Kansas. It's just the boring stretch of I-70 between Kansas City and Denver, or we're a red state. or even this old stereotype that Lawrence is a blue bubble in a red state. Those are all, I think, too simple. And Kansas is just as rich and interesting as anywhere else, and it's full of advocates, and they're doing work that starts in Kansas and can resonate across the country. I think we certainly see that with the Ravens advocacy about Amazon and small businesses, and hopefully it can be seen with the advocacy that you're interested in as you think about the role of advocacy and the importance of it in your lives. So that's the Ravens' new location. All of this there are a lot of good consequences from all of this, one of which is that we got busy enough that we needed to move into a new location right here on Mass Street. That's what it looks like. But I want to close today by talking about two other stories that have inspired me in thinking about Kansas and thinking about advocacy. And the first is my friend Meg Hereford at Ladybird Collected. Sorry, at Ladybird Diner, and her book called Ladybird Collected. Meg, when the pandemic hit in March 2020, I remember my last meal before not going to a restaurant for a long time was at Ladybird Diner in the Saturday in mid-March, and Meg was talking to me about how she didn't know what she was going to do. And then a week later, she was shut down just like all the other restaurants. And as an effort to clear her pantry, she made bagged lunches and just handed them out for free one day. And the demand was so intense, and there were so many people and so much need that she eventually just made free meals every day for months and months and months. She handed out thousands and thousands of free lunches just from the front patio of the Ladybird Diner, and it became a community resource and a food pantry and a place where people could get a good meal dependably Monday through Friday, regardless of what was happening in their lives or around the world. And that was just, she so quickly forgot everything there is to know about small businesses. This is clearly a very expensive and not money-making endeavor, but that didn't let it stop her. And she made it work. She raised money, she hustled, she made sure people in her community were fed. And this is just an inspiring pivot from a really good restaurant into a food pantry, and seeing a need and taking care of it and making it happen. And then one of the projects she made to fund her food pantry work was a book called Ladybird Collected, which is the Ravens' #1 seller of all time. I'm proud to say we've sold many, many copies of Ladybird Collected, and $20 from the sale of each book went right back to the meal program. Since then, Meg has reopened Ladybird Diner, but it's still a place where people know they can get a meal for free if they need it. And she's still doing philanthropic work as a part of her business. So rather than return to normal, Meg has reinvented her business in a new way that both focuses on its pre-pandemic strengths and uses lessons from the pandemic to lead to advocacy and community building. So Meg is one of my heroes for sure. And then second, during the uprisings and protests in summer of 2020, a group of Black Lives Matter activists took over Mass Street and encamped across Mass Street by South Park, protesting, of course, the killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police, but also the plight of Rontaris Washington, who had been imprisoned in the Douglas County Jail, just awaiting trial without conviction for 5 years, which is just, it's too long for anybody to be in jail, let alone without a trial or conviction. And the protest culminated at a bond hearing where the judge lowered his bond, and these activists instantly raised the money to free him from jail after 5 years. But the thing about bail is you need collateral as well, and they needed, I think $200,000 worth of collateral, and the protesters had the cash, but not the collateral. And people, you would need to put up a house or some sort of asset. And so a couple area small businesses, including the Raven and Wonderfare and Bates and Company, who owns Burger Stand plus Repetition Coffee, got together and put up parts of their businesses as collateral to get Rontaris out of jail. it's really, in the long run, I think it's a small thing. It's one person, but it got a lot of people to, of course, it made a huge difference for Rantaris, whose case has since been dismissed. But it was one thing that we small businesses could do to make one person's life a lot easier, and also bring this idea of cash bail and imprisonment into the spotlight. And I think people in the election that fall, people were really talking about cash bail and abolition in interesting ways that I hadn't seen in the Lawrence election cycle before. So again, small businesses can be advocates. They can do community building. I think these are all three stories that happen in Kansas that have national ramifications and resonance. And they're all things that inspire me and keep me going, not only as a business owner, but as an advocate. With that, I will wish you good luck. I will hope that you have found some inspiration today, either through my talk or the rest of the Kansas Day of Advocacy programming. And even if Kansas feels like a small corner of a big world, know that what you do here can really have a big impact across the country and around the world. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck.